Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric here with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today we got another Gun Gripe episode for you, and I've got special guests with me here today. This is Mr. Clay Cheshire from Munitions Law Group, and we thought he would be the perfect person to discuss our Gun Gripe at hand today, and that is going to be billboards on guns, lawyer billboards and lawyer locks, and all of these lawyer features that get put on guns that we end up having to see. And we thought we would sort of elaborate, and hopefully you guys can get a little bit of information about why that is, why it happens. And obviously he's going to be the person to tell you that. So up until a certain point, you know, there really hasn't been like a stringent requirement that makes companies physically mark a gun in some way, shape, or form with any form of a warning, right? If we look at, like, this is an old H&R Sahara from the early 60s. Okay, this is an old gun, right? There's not even a serial number on this gun, much less any type of warning. Now, obviously, we see here, this is a Model T55 Sahara by Harrington and Richardson and Company. And that's it. It shows the caliber, and that's it. There's no serial number on this gun whatsoever. So up until a certain point, firearms were not even required to have serial numbers, much less some form of a warning. So in this society that we have created, or that we live in these days, this modern society, how has it come all the way from now we don't have serial numbers all the way to not only do we have serial numbers, but we have warnings physically on the gun and locks and things? How did we get there?
Well, I mean, there's a couple different answers to that question. So first of all, the law only requires certain types of markings on firearms, okay? You've got to have the name of the manufacturer, you've got to have the city and state of manufacturer, you've got to have a serial number. So you've got certain things that are minimally required to be marked on firearms in certain places, right? You can't just put them anywhere, you have to put them in certain places under the law.
Sure.
And so that's what you see, I think, on most guns. Most manufacturers will only put what they are legally required to put on their firearms. Then you have some other guns, other firearms, where there's some additional stuff that's on there, and those things are not required. But they, these manufacturers have made a business decision to add certain things. I mean, if there's something in particular you want to talk about, pick it up and show it.
So first, all right. So here's a Ruger Standard Auto. This one was made in 1972. Okay, so since it's post 68, it does have, I know it's blued, it's hard to see, but it does have a serial number. Okay, it's got the make and model and obviously where it's made and everything like that. But you see on the barrel, no warning. Okay, it just says Ruger, gives the caliber. It's just a nice classic auto-loading pistol, but with a serial number as required by law post 68. Fast forward to a little bit more modern Ruger. All right, this is a Super Blackhawk. This one was made, I want to say, around the mid-80s, okay? But what do you see here? On the side of the barrel, a giant billboard. I'm going to read it. It says, "Before using gun, read warnings and instruction manual available free from Sturm, Ruger and Company," and it goes on to mention Southport, Connecticut, USA. Mm-hmm. And you've got this giant billboard on the side of your pistol.
Yep.
That's not required to be there.
That's not required to be there.
It's there because...
Here's why it's there.
Yeah.
So Ruger makes a lot of firearms. Smith & Wesson has an additional warning on this pistol, this M&P, and it says that the firearm can...
it's capable of being fired with the magazine removed.
Right. So in other words, if there's a round in the chamber, it can be fired. So those are not required by law, but the reason they're there is because Smith & Wesson, I'm speculating here based on experience, Smith & Wesson and Ruger make a lot of firearms. They spend an enormous amount of money every year paying attorneys to defend them in civil lawsuits related to firearms injuries. And the way you defend most firearms injuries, in my experience, having done it for years, is you start out with misuse. Misuse is a doctrine that basically says if the firearm was used in a way that is contrary to how the user was instructed to use it, right? Then they lose. The plaintiff loses. So what these manufacturers are doing is they are
covering their
shoring up. Well, that's one way to look at it. But they're shoring up their misuse defense. They're shoring up their product liability. Their failure to warn, and then their and creating a misuse defense argument, a better misuse defense argument by saying, look, we have told you very specifically to read the manual, which contains all of the warnings about use.
Sure.
Or we've told you very specifically.
And of course, those manuals are very well written by a team. You know,
it's hard for a plaintiff who gets injured in a shooting. Say a plaintiff shot himself by accident, allegedly using a pistol that says it can be fired with the magazine detached. It's hard for that plaintiff to recover against the manufacturer of that gun for a shot that happened when the magazine was out, but he didn't clear the chamber.
Right. So he can't go back and say, well, I pulled the magazine out. Sir, it can be shot without the magazine in it. Yep. And what that refers to, in case some of you don't know, some firearms have a magazine disconnect safety. Even if a round is in the chamber, if the magazine is not inserted, the firearm will not fire unless the magazine is in the gun. And that's called a magazine disconnect safety. It's considered an additional safety feature. Browning high powers, a lot of Bersa handguns, a few guns like that come to mind. Smith & Wesson Model 59 has a magazine disconnect safety. There's probably many others, but in this case, most of your modern polymer frame guns, such as Glocks, M&Ps, any of those types of modern guns, are all going to be able to be discharged without a magazine in the gun. So what you're saying is by having that there, if Joe Blow goes, well, I pulled the mag out and then point at the floor and squeeze the trigger and killed the dog.
It's hard to blame Smith.
You can't blame them when it says it right there.
It's hard to blame them. So really, if you have any consternation about these additional markings, don't direct it toward the manufacturers. Direct it toward the people that sue them when they shouldn't. I mean, I having defended TARs for years in a lot of these cases, there were a lot. Most suits involved somebody who was violating, the rules about combining alcohol or drugs with a firearm, pointing it in a direction of their own body and pulling the trigger. I mean, those were misuse cases, and so these warnings are designed to help mitigate the costs related to defending themselves in these civil lawsuits. And when you're Ruger and Smith that make a lot of firearms, right? They're dealing with a lot of lawsuits.
Absolutely, and I can understand that. So this is a Ruger M77 Mark II. I want to say these were made around the early 90s, unless I'm mistaken on my dates there. But even in the early 90s, again, we've got a Ruger rifle, and this is one of my favorite rifles. I love the Ruger M77 Mark II, specifically the all-weather that has a boat paddle stock. This is one of my favorite rifles in terms of balance, and it's just a great gun. But again, on the barrel, you've got the warning. Mm-hmm. Now, has that ever stopped me from buying a gun? And I guess, look, this is the gripe aspect of this video. This is where I'm griping a little bit. Some of us like a little bit more kind of form over function. We like for our guns to be pretty and to look nice. And, and another thing, a lot of people hate import marks. Okay, a lot of pistols are import marks and have these big billboards on the side, and that goes right hand in hand with this. A lot of us collectors who like older guns, especially handguns. Handguns are a big part of it. When you have vintage handguns with these ugly import marks on them, it drives the collectors crazy because it's this giant dot matrix mark on it. Now, of course, it's legalities in place as to, it has to be import marked. That's part of the law. But is it going to keep me from buying a given gun just because it's got a warning billboard on it or if it's got an import mark? No. Does that also mean that some of the more vintage pieces that lack those markings maybe become intrinsically a little bit more valuable as a result? I would say the answer is yes. Yes. I mean, these older ones are going to go up in value a lot more because they kind of go back to a time when none of that just was really in people's minds. It was just company making guns and,
Pre-Gun Control Act.
Yeah.
Less lawsuits.
Okay, so this is a modern Smith. This one, I think I bought it last year. So this is a relatively modern Smith & Wesson revolver. This is that Model 69 Combat Magnum. This is a 357. We did a video on this gun, by the way, if you guys want to check it out. But again, here's another feature, the lock. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the gun ships with a little key and you can lock it and everything like that. So that's another feature where I suppose someone was trying to cover themselves a bit. some lawyer said, hey, you should put a lock on your gun. Maybe that's what prompted that.
Well, Smith obviously made a business decision. I can't speak to exactly why they did that, but they had their reasons for doing it, and obviously it's a feature that you can choose to use or choose not to use.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, they felt like they wanted to add these things to their firearms, and hopefully it's been something that they're happy with.
Yeah,
they make great guns.
Oh, of course they do.
By the way.
Of course they do. And I own vintage Smith & Wesson revolvers as well as modern Smith & Wesson revolvers. Is the lock on there going to keep me from buying the gun? No, of course not. Here's an older Smith here that does not have the lock. Okay, you start getting into some of the lever action rifles as well. When you start getting into newer Marlins that have a crossbolt safety that they made them put in, versus older Marlins that lack a crossbolt safety and they just have a half cock notch on the hammer, and then that's the only form of safety there is. So, I've got a early 50s Marlin 336 over there that doesn't have a safety. The gun does not have a safety, and I know some people in their mind, they think, oh my God, I can't imagine a gun without a safety. But this is the safety.
Well,
don't squeeze the trigger, and you've got a half cock notch.
Yeah. And a lot of times the double action itself is a safety, obviously, and the weight of the trigger pull and that kind of stuff. So,
but is that to say that Marlin doesn't make great guns now just because they have crossbolt safeties? I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say that just because the crossbolt safety's there that it's an inferior gun, but it is a feature that intrinsically is there for a reason because of the reasons you mentioned. They made a decision to make, I guess, lawyer up, and make sure that they mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah, again, these are business decisions that are made collectively by decision makers at these companies, and they have their reasons for doing it. I wasn't involved in any of these decisions, so for me to talk about it, it's somewhat speculative, but also based on experience. But I mean, that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the Gun Control Act, which required markings, and then we're dealing with plaintiff's litigation and the cost of that, and the cost of insurance. The insurance that these companies have to get is enormously expensive. It is for retailers. It is for anybody else in the business. So, that's a business decision they make. And
sure. Do you think that, and maybe while we got the camera rolling, let's just talk about this briefly. And if you don't want to elaborate, or if you can elaborate, that's fine. Do you think that there was ever a turning point in business in the United States when it came to guns where gun companies started seeing a lot more of that? Like, you think that there was just this turning point where, like, what was it, like back in the 90s, like suing people was the thing? You know what I mean? Whereby, like, way back in the day, it was only reserved for, like, this just really bad stuff, but it seemed like people got real sue happy there for a while. Wasn't that the case? Do you think that had something to do with it? Or do you think it was a proactive thing that a lot of these companies said, you know what, we see the writing on the wall, this could happen, and I'm not saying it didn't happen, because obviously it did, but maybe they saw that it could happen and made a conscious effort to sort of retroactively just sort of blanket protect themselves a little better?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably, you have to look at it by manufacturer, and they have their different motivations for making the decisions that they've made. I don't know. I was born in 1975. I don't know what the frequency of lawsuits were in the 80s and 90s versus now, since I've been practicing. But I would say that we live in a culture now where there are a lot of suits that are brought that shouldn't be brought in the first place. And the unfortunate reality of our civil justice system is that I could sue you today and accuse you of doing something, breaking a contract with me that we don't have. And it would be completely made up, and you would have to hire somebody and defend yourself and spend money and time and energy defending yourself in a frivolous lawsuit that has no merit. If you don't defend yourself, then you'll have a default judgment and you'll lose, and you may have to pay damages. So, in a sense, it is very, at the beginning of a lawsuit, it's heavily favored toward plaintiffs. They can bring a claim. The defendants have to defend themselves. There's a cost related to that, and so they're having to make, that's a substantial, I would imagine, not being in those budgeting meetings, that all these manufacturers spend a substantial amount of revenue each year on legal costs. Yeah. So they're looking at numbers and they're trying to figure out how to manage those costs while trying to maximize profit. And I think that that's, part of what drives some of these decisions.
Food for thought. Food for thought. Guys, we thought this would be an interesting exercise and just show you examples of all of this type of stuff. And look, we're not saying that like Marlin and Ruger and Smith & Wesson are the only companies that do that. There are other companies that, put warnings on guns and things like that. We just thought it'd be interesting to mention it. And look, I also want to make something clear. Some of the guns on this table are like some of my favorite firearms. It's not saying anything negative about the gun in terms of how much I like it. It doesn't affect, my ability to go out and use this firearm and enjoy it. I really love this rifle. I really love my Smith & Wesson revolvers, but it's just something that some people, maybe they weren't aware of it. Maybe you didn't notice that, and maybe now you do. So, guys, thanks for watching today's video. We've been knocking out a lot of videos with Clay today. It's been a great day, and we've really enjoyed having him down. We thought this would be a fun topic to kind of spitball against. Let me know if you want to see more of Clay on the channel. We've been putting out a lot of videos and covering a lot of topics related to the 2A community in the legal sense. So if you haven't seen those videos, you definitely need to check them out with Clay and I. Maybe you'll learn something. And also, make sure you go over to Munitions Law Group on their YouTube channel and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because Derek over there, the guy with the big Viking red beard, does a great job in covering a lot of interesting topics. So make sure you go check them out. Or third solution is if you're in a really bad, dire straight situation related to legalities within the 2A world, these are your guys to talk to. So give Munitions Law Group a call. They're great guys. They will take care of you. I've worked with Derek and Clay on a couple projects, and they're wonderful dudes. They really do a great job, and they care very, very much about their clients. So thank you guys very much for watching today's video. Clay, thank you for coming down today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Guys, we really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Many more videos on the way.